Welcome to Startup Dudes. My name is Todd.
My name is Bill. How are you? Good to see you again.
He's my dad. We're going to talk to you today about the dream that many people have of opening a retail store or a small coffee shop or a boutique. How many stores would you say you've opened in your career?
I think the number is about 70, something like that, 75.
Have you learned a few things along the way?
Learned a few things.
So it's like a lot of people want to open up a restaurant, right? And they have no idea how much work is involved. And maybe a retail store is not quite as bad as a restaurant, but it's probably shares a lot of the challenges that restaurants do. What would you say are the top three mistakes that young retailers or young entrepreneurs who are opening their store make?
Well, too much space. They always saying goes, find out what's the smallest space you can think of for your store and cut it in half. And obviously that is that determines rent, right? So you want to minimize rent. Try to keep your rent under 10% if you can of gross sales. So you should be budgeting sales at least 10 times what the rent is, or you want to rethink it. So that would be one.
Can we talk a little bit about a real life example where you discovered that? So you had opened the Character Company stores in the late 70s, early 80s.
Yeah, that was a follow-on. I'd left Disney. That was a follow-on to, I'd opened the original Disneyana store at Disney, right? And that became the forerunner for the Disney stores. I learned that later, that they said, hey, you're the guy that started the Disney stores. But when I left Disney, I went and opened up a character shop, which would be all different kinds of characters, from Popeye to Mickey Mouse. And
when you say character shop, you mean just merchandise?
Mm-hmm. It was just a shop, and like stuffed animals, okay. And we had
comic books.
We had Popeye spinach cans and all
apparel, lots of apparel.
Lots of apparel. Okay. So
similar to the types of shops that you might see at Disneyland.
Okay. And that store was my first store was 3,000 square feet. I think it was 3,200.
Big. It's big, right?
It turned out to be too big, and that's part of the lesson you learn when you do this. You make mistakes. It was too big.
So the rent was too high?
The rent was too high as a percent of gross, and it was on the second floor. It was really hard to get into a mall. When you're an entrepreneur and you don't have the clout of a Disney or somebody like that.
Or Nordstrom.
So I found myself in the second level, and that had to do with the gross not being where it needed to be. So I felt like I was getting a lot of encouragement for the concept. People, everybody from finance people to consumers. So I thought I should open a couple more stores, but do it smaller. And you remember the Lakewood store?
I do. That thing was tiny.
It was tiny. It was like 300. But it was an express version like you'd see in an airport. And it was doing gangbusters.
So it was the most profitable.
It was the most profitable.
You were covering the 10 to 1.
Yeah. And it was only 10% or so of the of the very first one.
Okay.
We had a couple more stores as well.
Okay, so first mistake that they make, if they, again, this is assuming you've run the numbers and there seems to be good proof of concept and you've got a good location, obviously, right, would be to, whatever you think you need, cut it in half or something along those lines. What would you advise them would be the next thing they should consider?
Well, you want to test the concept. I mean, what I did was the first time that anybody ever did something like that outside of the theme parks. So it was.
So it wasn't in a resort environment.
No, so
which
it was
means
really hard
the traffic.
It was really hard to test it. But if you can, look at relative to your theme or what it is you want to do, try to find versions of it. Maybe this over here is 25% of that, or this is a little bit like that, and try to use different experiences that are already existing to give you some research. And if you don't come out of it with a lot of confidence, then move on for your next idea, because ideas are like bottomless pits. You know,
They're a dime a dozen.
If you're a creative person, you're an entrepreneur, you're going to have you're just going to keep them coming. So don't worry about giving up. Don't get married to it. You know, don't worry about giving up. And so I would say that would be research. Would be the second one.
So proof of concept before you get
As much
to that
as you
point.
can. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then is there a third one? Anything you can think of with regard to inventory?
Well, I've been a retailer on and off for 50 years, so I know inventory upside down.
Do you dream inventory and sleep?
I hate inventory.
Why do you hate inventory?
Well, besides having to count it, it ties up capital.
Okay.
And it gets old.
And it gets stolen.
Yeah, especially these days.
And it gets broken.
Yeah. So some of these stores that are getting shoplifted, man, I'd be out of there in a heartbeat.
Interesting.
But I think if you hate it, I don't use that word very often, do I?
If you hate inventory.
Yeah, I think if you hate it, it's going to give you a better mindset. You'll be a little bit more careful. Try to come up with different creative ways to bring inventory in, like have people drop ship for you.
And what does that do for them?
For them,
For the retailer?
you get to run the sales through, and you don't have to carry the inventory. So if you could
drop ship as you need it. Okay.
Or even as the customer buys it,
Even better.
you drop ship it from the supplier. There's a lot of that going on today. Not so much when I was doing the stores, but now you can probably come up with 50% at least
Of the assortment.
of this, creative ways. Another one is called, besides drop shipping, another one is called consignment. That means you pay the supplier after you've sold it, and they don't like that. I mean, suppliers don't like that.
But they might be willing to do it because
if they have some inventory, they're trying to move.
right. Or they're trying to come up with a proof of concept.
Yeah, you can ask them. You say, do you have inventory that you'd be willing to consign? Oh yeah, I got some stuff that's I can't seem to move. I don't have the right market. I X, Y, and Z. I would do a deal like that. Now, if you can, that way you can actually put the inventory in the store. And with the drop shipping, you can too, but you just have like some samples, and then you drop ship the rest of the inventory. I would say consignment. Another classification is called guaranteed sale. And for the retailer, that's not as good as consignment, because the title doesn't pass on consignment. The title on the inventory doesn't pass to you as a retailer until after you sold it. It's very brief. It's like a second. But guaranteed sale, when you buy it from a supplier, the title's passed. I mean, you own it. But guaranteed sale, if that's the term of your deal, put that in a purchase order, and that becomes term and condition, right? You can send it back.
So is that RTV? Is that what they call that? Return to vendor or return to?
Well, return to vendor is anything you return to vendor, no matter what type of sale it was.
Okay.
But the guaranteed sale is you buy it, you got to pay for it. Consignment, you weren't paying for it until you sold it, right? So that's ideal from a retailer's point of view.
Cash flow and all that.
So, the suppliers don't like it that way. Guaranteed sale don't like either. They don't like, because you might send it back. So suppliers like, wholesalers like, when they sell it, that it's gone. They don't have to worry about getting it back later. So those are three different creative ways to minimize the impact of inventory. Again, use the 50% rule. Again, if you think you need 24 pieces, buy 12.
Can that apply, that philosophy or that recommendation apply to any kind of products?
Yes.
Anything.
Even in food and beverage.
Right, that's what I was thinking.
As long as there's no spoilage involved, because that complicates the issue, right? They don't want to send something back that's spoiled.
So what would you say to it? What would you say if you're trying to negotiate with your supplier and they won't do guaranteed sale and they won't do consignment?
Well, it depends upon how much I want the inventory. If I wanted a lot,
then you might do a PO.
I just buy it, regularly.
Okay.
But if I don't need it, if it's just nice to have, there's a lot of fish in the ocean. You can go to a lot of different suppliers. If you go to trade shows, that's an easy conversation to have. You're walking by the booth and you say, hey, do you have any inventory that you'd be willing to consign? And they say no. Or do you have any inventory you'd be willing to sell on a guaranteed sale basis? Well, yeah, if you've got a decent P&L yourself, I can take a chance,
It's good advice. I think, there's been a lot of talk about brick and mortar going away forever. I don't know if that's ever going to be the case, right? I mean, you think about the bazaar, and these have been going on for thousands of years, right? Where people gather at central locations to buy stuff. There's a social component to it, right? There's a fun aspect to it that you just can't replicate online.
That's right.
So
it depends upon, the store in the most basic sense is a billboard. It's a billboard. An Apple store is a billboard. It's a logo. It's a symbol of the total presentation presented and set out the way that you want it set out in the most, optimistic version of it. It's beautiful. The Apple stores are absolutely stunning even today after all these years.
And they haven't changed much.
I think if you feel you need a brand presence, if you need a billboard like that, that's a good reason to have one. Now, sometimes you can do one and then do the rest of your business online.
So have a flagship.
Even if you notice what's going on with Disney stores and Warner stores these days, they've closed a lot of them, and the ones that they've kept, the ones they've kept are in flagship locations, like on New York City, Fifth Avenue, and Hong Kong, and
South Coast Plaza.
They're probably still there. The Glendale Galleria in California was the very first Disney store, and I think that one recently closed. But that's probably, I'm just talking generalities, right? Depends upon your particular circumstances, but that's probably a generalized view, is consider a brick and mortar as a flagship and a billboard, particularly if you can get an outstanding location where lots of people go by and see it. And then try to build up your business online as much as you can. Online is perfect to have dropship relationships with all kinds of suppliers
You don't have to carry
around
any
the country.
inventory.
Yeah, you can. And the two big things you got to be careful about, as we've already stated, is your rent. Now, you don't have any rent with an online, and then in inventory, you can get in trouble with too much inventory. It ties up your capital, and it gets old.
It can mess up the brand too if you're discounting all your stuff all the time.
You start closing it out, and people say, what's going on with this brand?
Maybe I shouldn't buy it either.
What happens if Apple Store started closing out everything? You'd say, uh-oh. So I like the idea of a flagship brand store. Again, this is generalities, right? Depends upon your circumstances. And then go 100 miles an hour on online.
And you can have more than one flagship, potentially.
That's right.
If it's successful.
And there is, like in the case of Disney, there is more than one flagship. In a Warner store, there is more than one. It's funny that they started out everywhere. Almost every mall had a Disney store, right? And they got in trouble with it, and ended up. It's really funny because when you get outside of the womb of Disneyland and Walt Disney World, I'm just talking about the United States, you're protected. You've got a big traffic going through, 70,000, 80,000 people. Those stores are fine. They're not closing. They might change the use of a store, but they're not going anywhere. But you go outside of the parks.
Even Disney outside the parks struggles.
That's exactly what I was leading.
So if they struggle, everybody can struggle.
That's right.
What did you guys used to say back in the early days as buyers at Disneyland, that you could put rubber vomit out there and people would buy it? And
that was kind of crass, but there was a lot of truth in saying that. There was a lot of forgiveness, and sometimes we had people on the merchandising team, I won't name any names, that used to think they were geniuses, the genius of the world. because they were doing huge sales per square foot, and their stores are very successful, and everything that they buy was a great item and very successful. But the truth is,
The magic wasn't them; it was Disney.
it was
It
the,
was
it
the
was the haunted
location.
mansion
Yeah.
in the castle. And I started to refer to it as bookkeeping merchandising. Now, if you're a theme park merchant, you don't like that,
No.
because it
Cheapens your
tends-
value.
yeah, it
Cheapens your
tends to
work.
minimize what you do. But you go outside, and you're competing with all the other retailers out there, trying to track traffic, using advertisements and windows, and that separates the men from the boys.
Yeah, that's when it really gets difficult.
That's right. So the theme park, that's how I started.
Okay.
That's how I started. Well, actually, I started with JCPenney's when I was going to college for 4 years, and then I went to work. But I really feel like I started my retailing background at Disney World, because that's where I did start it at, when I graduated from college and went to work there. So but still, there was great experiences that you take away, even though you don't learn the real competitive merchandising business. You don't learn that there. But you do learn a lot about presentation and about show value and the culture, so it was a great experience.
So maybe one other piece of advice might be to cut your teeth somewhere else before you open up your own store.
For sure.
Right. Learn how to do it at Penny's and Disney, and then you probably have a better shot of being successful
That's right.
on your own.
But remember, 90% of startups probably don't make it,
Yeah,
right?
at least.
I mean, even the Disney stores, and one of the top brands in the entire world, they closed a lot of stores. So 90% of the time not work. So you want to minimize your risk. You want to minimize capital requirements. That's the reason I like the online stuff so much, because there's not a lot of expense associated
Of course,
with it.
with the online, we should do another episode about how do you break out, because you're competing against millions and millions of people at that point, or millions of concepts. But
But you can use,
talk about that at another
as you
time.
know, you can use influencers. There's a lot of things you can do to bring traffic. But I think it's a safer use of your money, and that's foremost in our minds, is to help you navigate and avoid, mistakes and making change. That's all part of life. It's okay. But
Maybe we can help our viewers.
You don't want
to
to wipe yourself out,
Or-
all your savings. So we want to see that you stay as safe as possible with your experimentation in life.
Right, and learn from the mistakes that we've made. Well, that'll be it for today, everyone. Thanks for tuning in. Don't forget to subscribe, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you. Good seeing you.